Traveling to Luleå this time has started with quite a big delay of 45 minutes. So first, already inside the aircraft, when everybody was seated and the pilot had greeted us a nice warm welcome, there were two things that had a question mark to them. The first one was that they called out for a Mr., let's call him Robinson. Is there a Mr. Robinson in this aircraft? And Mr. Robinson wasn't. The reason to why the question was asked was that Mr. Robinson had a ticket which consisted of several parts, and he decided to cancel the third and last part of his ticket, and his bag was inside the aircraft, but he was not. So the pilot kindly informed us that we cannot take off until we remove that gentleman's bag, because for security reasons, each bag has to be connected to a passenger. To my very happy surprise, it was very easy for the staff to locate this bag, and I could see when they loaded on the cargo that each luggage was scanned before being put inside the aircraft. So I'm assuming that there is a system that makes it very easy to find each suitcase for exactly cases like this. The second part that caused our delay was the fact that the weather was a risk for lightning and thunder, and when that is the case, no personnel is allowed to be on the runway, and of course, no fueling is allowed because of risk for ignition. The same rules, of course, also apply to passengers. So had we not already boarded our plane and waited for departure, but, for example, had landed and wanted to leave, we would have to be seated until the danger of lightning had passed. But then it was our turn, and the chief cabin officer will be announcing it in English.
We are now ready for takeoff. Please check that your seatbelt is securely fastened and that your seat back and tray table are in the upright position.
Depending on the engine, depending on the aircraft model, depending on crying babies, depending on manufacturers, sometimes I choose to wear earplugs when I'm flying. And this time, I actually had purchased a pair at the pharmacy directly at the airport, and I'm led to believe, without having done more research, that this is a really good brand. They have an explanation at the back of the package, which to begin with is appealing to the eye, that this is the kind of earplug that will help you at a certain range of decibels. So above this certain range, it will just have no effect. And when the brand is honest about such things, then I tend to come back as a customer. Moreover, it said how often it should be cleaned. I've never seen that on any package before. And it said that it can be used up to about 100 times. So honest, very clear about the usage. I am very happy, and the size is really good as well, so I think I'll be buying a next pair after those 100 times have been used up. When flying this flight to Luleå, I had to stay at the end destination, Luleå Airport, for a couple of hours waiting for my particular taxi to take me back to my small hometown, Jokkmokk. We have a particular arrangement where I get to have a taxi, which is technically speaking a bus, but since there are so few of us traveling, I have to pre-order this taxi no later than at 5 in the afternoon the day before, and then a taxi will come and pick me up at a particular hour, so I cannot change the hour, so therefore it's more like a bus. But usually it tends to be only me traveling back to the city. Sometimes it has happened that customers have traveled with me from Jokkmokk to Luleå, but usually not the other way around. Perhaps unexpectedly, these journeys are very, very cheap. They are heavily subsidized by the region, meaning that a journey which lasts for 2.5 hours by an ordinary taxi would have at least cost me 600 euros, probably much more. Now, with the agreement between the bus company in the north and the taxis, this journey only costs each person traveling 30 euros. That's fantastic, to say the least. And while waiting at the airport to have this taxi arrive and pick me up, I noticed that there is a destination which you cannot search for with that particular aircraft company. It said it would depart from Malmö, but there are no direct flights with that company. I've searched very well. So I realized that was a so-called empty flight. But wait, have a look at that dry patch of asphalt right underneath us. It stopped raining, so it is easy to guess why it is dry at this particular area. And that is because all the aircrafts that have taken off before us have heated up with the heat that comes from the engines, the stretch behind them. So this is an example of how fast water can evaporate when it is this hot. And coming back to the topic of empty flights, I have not done sufficient research just yet. So the few things I know is that it is not uncommon that aircrafts actually depart empty. So they can be overbooked, but they can also have 0 passengers traveling with them. From the very limited research I've done so far, it seems that a time slot is very, very, very expensive. So expensive that it makes much more economical sense to fly that stretch empty without any passengers than losing it. And I again don't know the rules. If you lose your time slot, if you don't fly after just a couple of times, I will try to find that out as well, if it depends on the particular agreements. Not bringing up the fact that maybe you should change your time slot if nobody is coming for that particular time slot. And maybe as we speak, there is artificial intelligence doing even more and better calculations to reduce the amount of empty flights being made by each company yearly. In just a few instances now, we will begin to accelerate, so the landscape outside the window will move faster and faster. And maybe the aircraft in the story isn't an empty flight, but only 2 people were waiting to board it. So I walked up to them and asked, "Are you pilots?" And they were. So, therefore, I could ask a question I've been looking for an answer to for a long time. Very basic one. When you are on the runway, you will be noticing box-like signposts in red, black and yellow, like at 2:15 in this video. And of course, these are signposts that indicate for the aircraft where to go. But I want to know, is there an additional meaning? So when you read, for example, OZ or BD, would that mean something in addition? That something is to the west, or that the runway is upcoming in 2 sections, or whatever there is to know. So the pilot said usually there is nothing particular behind the significance of each letter, but typically they had observed that behind a Y and a T, that would mean that is the runway upcoming very soon, or the runway itself. So now when we are traveling up north to Luleå, how far away is it exactly? I'll give you a hint. It's very far up. Taking this example, a friend going to a conference in Umeå, which is a city on the way to Luleå, and even the names are so close in pronunciation, so you would think they must be super close geographically. So he thought this would be a very quick visit, easily done, and then I asked him to check the hours and the kilometers. So yes, we are saving time. If he's traveling from Stockholm to Umeå by train, for example, then it's only 9 hours. So his idea was that once the conference had finished, he would take the train to the remaining close distance to me and visit me. That is a short journey of 4 hours. So this wasn't in the terms of like taking the subway to the next train station. So we came up with different, very innovative ideas on how to make this work. We tried to calculate, so if I would fly from Luleå to Stockholm and then from Stockholm to Umeå, that still would be faster than taking the train from Luleå to Umeå. So he had the distances confirmed and realized he would not be making it on time and he couldn't be visiting me. So in numbers, from Stockholm Arlanda to Umeå Airport, it is 603 kilometers, 266 kilometers between Umeå and Luleå airports, and 869 kilometers in total between Arlanda Airport and Luleå Airport, with the correction for that the map I'm using is looking at land destination, so we're not looking at the trajectory of the flight, which should be a little bit shorter. And again, I don't even live in Luleå. I live in Jokkmokk, so I have an additional 2.5 hours by that fantastic taxi to travel. Side note, or main note, depending on how you see the different stories evolving in this video, we just had some rain on the window. Now we are both flying away from it and approaching being above those clouds. And I mean, I don't have an opinion about the size of the Earth. This is not where I'm aiming at all. It's just that if I'm to visit a friend in Brussels, if I'm to visit a friend in Germany, if I'm to visit a friend in Bulgaria, always add 24 hours to the beginning of the journey and to the ending of the journey to make sure to be there on time. So if I promise someone, we can meet on the 15th, and that's a Saturday, I should begin traveling on the 14th, Friday. The lovely aspect of this is that it changes your perspective on distances and time altogether. So I have many friends living in Stockholm, so their reference point is 24 hours shorter than mine, according to my argument about adding 24 hours to each part of the journey. And therefore, if we try to say go to Croatia, which actually was an attempt we tried to do this summer, then we would have to start traveling from different cities. And me now being used to that my first day will be already 24 hours of travel, adding 6 hours in addition doesn't really matter. So to my friend, that sounds like a lot, and therefore we disagreed on where to meet. We had found a route that would take us to Dubrovnik, and I would be landing somewhere near Graz. I think I pronounced the Austrian city correctly. So I would rent a car and go to Dubrovnik and meet up my friend there, and that would take several hours. Not a problem, because it will still be shorter than going from Stockholm to Luleå by car, to which my friend objected. A delightful part about this journey, us going to Luleå on this flight, is that I've never been seated next to the window, and if I have, it has always been so cloudy I was never able to see the city underneath us. So it will not be as cloudy today, and we will be able to see Archipelago near Luleå, and that is very beautiful. You just saw a river and the forest, and it already was very, very beautiful to see. And this stretch is particularly beautiful, so I really like flying from Stockholm to Luleå. One night I would be arriving so late that no taxi would be coming and pick me up. And I just turned to my neighbor and said, "Are you going to Luleå city?" And she said yes. And I said, "Would you be willing to take me with you in your car?" And no doubt she said blank yes. She made a call to her husband, and it wasn't to ask, it was to inform him, "See, we're taking this stranger with us, and we're going to drop her off at her hotel." So that was very kind. We are now entering a particularly cloudy area up in the sky, and a friend of mine actually remarked, "Oh, how about this joke?" Which wasn't funny, but I see her point. It should be very dirty in the sky because nobody's cleaning it. And we were like, no, well, but there is the wind, and yeah, well, okay, the joke was bad. But my point was that we're now racing higher, and there are also very beautiful formations. Not only is the landscape underneath us very beautiful to watch, but the clouds are also particularly nice to watch too. This is where you make your ad to show that flying is great. This is where you show dreams by saying, oh, if you use our shoes and you'll be running, this is how you'll feel, like, oh, seventh cloud, etc. And actually, I've been collecting a couple of expressions, what you say about clouds. So we have seventh heaven, we have cloud nine, and then I've made up a couple of more jokes, which I'm sorry are not much better than the just one. Look at all these clouds. Is this where we store our data? Do you see any cloudberries anywhere? Cloudberries in Swedish are, by the way, called hjortron. Okay, last joke of the day, I think. This is more kids appropriate. So, this is the cotton candy factory. Okay, that was the penultimate one. Now I think is the last joke. So once upon a time, there was a guy named Desi, and his surname was Bell. When you measure the intensity of a sound, you express it in the unit of decibel, and that is emerging from that this guy, Desi, was standing and screaming. And if you have many guys, it's like horsepowers. You have many Desi guys standing one next to each other screaming, and if you measure that, so 5 decibel is 5 screaming guys, and then you compare it to a roaring engine. And then for another scale, you can also add real handheld bells. So it's Bell in double sense. You just happen to have the surname, which was Bell. If you sound very convincing telling this very strange made-up story, then you might convince someone for a second or two. So to be clear, that was a joke. Not all jokes are funny. This was an attempt to one. So there is no guy called Desi Bell. However, the measurement does refer to a person who carried the name Bell, Alexander Graham Bell. And actually, I remembered another joke now. This is a joke which is not the kind of joke that you tell someone with puns and you try to convince someone of something. No, this is a reference to a scout group which I got to know. I didn't join as a member, but I volunteered with them for a couple of events. They are called Träkvista Scoutkår, and they find themselves on the island of Ekerö, which is in the Stockholm area. And they had arranged for a joke that was for the youth that are members to come and guess what it was. And one thing that they'd done during one event was placing a big fish net somewhere near the ceiling, and it took some time to figure out that actually meant the net, the internet, and that was the joke. And this time they were very creative. I really appreciated getting to know them. For one occasion, they had invented a new aircraft company, and that was the most cheap aircraft company in the entire world, called Bryanair. So with Bryanair, you don't have any seats. So when looking at the drawing of the aircraft, when you can select a seat, instead of the symbols for seats, you see footprints, because you can get to choose where to stand, because they're only standing places, and that reduces the cost greatly. And therefore, Bryanair is known to be the cheapest aircraft of them all. Now, our landing is very close. What I believe is a trend, I'm not certain this is actually standard, because then I would have heard it more often, is that pilots have begun announcing, saying, okay, so the route is straight, but we will be turning left, and then right, and then straight onto the airport. So informing about where there are turns upcoming. I think that is very appreciated by many people. Something else that is usually much appreciated is receiving flowers, and in particular on Valentine's Day. So around that time of the year, cut flowers are flown by aircrafts, and there is a race to keep them fresh. Take the United States of America. They mostly import roses from Colombia and Ecuador for Valentine's Day. A rose takes 15 weeks to grow. Then the flowers are put into a dormant state by lowered temperature, transported in refrigerated trucks, and more than 30 flights will move flowers from Colombia to Miami every day a few weeks before Valentine's Day. From picked fresh to delivery into a store, that takes 48 hours. This process is of course harming to nature, as nearly everything else that we transport moves by ship, and transporting flowers this way is a $34 billion global industry. So many people would be interested in keeping the system afloat the way it is. And somehow, amidst all this, I see the wonderfulness in a plane full of flowers landing. Well, I admit I do see the wonderfulness in an entire ship full of flowers coming into a harbour too. And for us who want to keep on giving and receiving fresh cut flowers to express sympathy, love and congratulations, a simple action is to choose flowers that are from a country much closer to you. Now we are even closer to Luleå, and even shorter time is left for landing. And I remember when flying to Vienna, we were very close to the airport. We had been descending since some time when I suddenly felt the air under the wings growing in force, and we rose back up to the sky again. The captain announced something in German, which was not very clear, and summed it up in English, which was even less clear. You know, the kind of message, check. Okay, thank you. So I asked one of the stewardesses when stepping off, What was the reason for us going higher up and circulate before going in for landing from the same direction again? The answer was a bird. It had flown into an aircraft from the side and had fallen onto the runway, so the runway had to be cleaned before it could be our turn to land. So the circle time was the cleaning time. Also, upon my return from Vienna to Stockholm, I was almost eating during supervision. Almost. I had had adventure-saturated days in Innsbruck, Salzburg, and visiting a castle above the German border. Another one of the total 3 that Ludwig II did not have the 3 million of marks to fully complete, and I had bought hummus in an Austrian store. I tried to boycott unnecessarily expensive airplane foods as far as possible, so I brought the hummus with me to the airport. And since it was a very hot day, the hummus began looking like liquid hummus. And hummus normally is already regarded as a liquid anyway in the eyes of the airport staff. I explained to the staff about the delicacy I was carrying when they were about to scan my other parts of the bag, and that is when I learned that they can put the food in a red tray, not the dark blue ones which they use for the rest, to demonstrate that the item I have with me stands out, and if the scan is okay, then I can eat my hummus under supervision. 3 staff had a look at my hummus, which grew more and more important by the minute, and it passed the test. I was allowed to have it, and no supervision was initiated. Seeing this lovely bay, I'm reminded of that when I moved here in February, you can't always tell what is land and what is water when it's all covered in white snow. Of course, you have the ice first, then you have the snow, but here clearly you can tell, that's the forest, yeah, and that's the water. But that's not the case winter time. So when summer came, I rediscovered the entire landscape. The city where I live, Luleå, everything. The ice here is so thick that we have something called ice roads, which I am more than happy to show you when that time comes again. The government regularly updates the website to show which part of the roads are open and how heavy the vehicles you are bringing on it are allowed to be. So it could be a tractor removing snow. You could also go by car. So it's actually an additional road. So it's called ice road because you actually can take a car, but you can also walk there. And people do. People take long walks, walking from island to island because wintertime is possible. A favorite piece of information, which I got from the Tourist Information Center, is the lovely red cottage, which makes waffles wintertime, and they only announce it by having a flag on that island. So you cannot dial any number and call and ask, are you open today? And there is no website to visit. So you actually have to walk down on the ice to get to the island and be served the waffles, and you can tell it's open if the flag is up all the way. Every ice road leads to a surprise waffle. No, I'm joking. You might be wondering why I talk about winter already, and that is because when it comes very fast. So while the rest of Europe has its vacation in August, which is usually the hottest month of the year, August already becomes colder in Sweden. I'm already complaining, now it's past midnight sun times, the darkness is approaching, and I'm saying this while being outdoors at 23, so 11 p.m. And I could finally walk on a road which is not covered with trees without a torch. Inside the forest I would need them. But this means there is still time to prepare. It will take time to find all the right sizes, so when winter hits, I want to be as prepared as possible. And how do you do that? You start in summer so that you don't do it last day just before winter comes. Of course, it won't be -27 or -44 right away. That will happen around December and January. But still, -13 is cold as well. And there have been historical cases when it was the end of school and it was being celebrated as you usually do in Sweden, and that last day was typically mid of June and there was a snowstorm in June. So weather can change quite rapidly and being prepared is always the best. But now it's still August Still very warm. I'm still enjoying myself very much in the sun. A well-kept secret might be that I never travel with luggage. I always have a rucksack on my back, and that way I can leave the airport and not wait for any luggage to arrive, or be lost for that matter. That happens. There is something new I've seen. I don't think it is new. I haven't noticed it before though. Something called the blue ribbon. So you pay extra to make sure that if your bags are lost, then you can get compensation up to 900 euros per bag. So there is a tracking system, and yet I have to pay for another one. I'm not sure I'm supporting this. So always pack the most important with you inside that light item that you're bringing with you next to your seat, because if the bag is lost, then you have the most necessary with you if you have to wait for 1 or more days. We have come to a standstill, and the staff on ground are awaiting the signal when it is safe for them to approach the aircraft when being on ground, and soon it's also our turn to exit. The book I brought with me on this journey is Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, the monk mystery so many people are talking about. I always seek for opportunities to improve my English, and this is a really good source to do so. And after I finish this one, I plan on taking on Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. And by the end of the month, the book I wrote myself, well, I'm exaggerating, it's a novella, it's 2 pages long, but it's very dense, it's very intense. And I set it in for a competition with the publishing house, and they should get back to me and say if it was an interesting read. I hope to get more than just generic feedback. And if I get published, believe this or not, the agreement is that I will lose the rights to my own work for 2 years' time. Time to leave the seat. Bye!